Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, hello. See some familiar faces out there. Good evening and welcome to a conversation with fermentation expert Sandor Katz and herbalist Linda Conroy. While we give everyone a minute to join us, let's see where we're all calling in from tonight. So if you want to find the chat and go ahead and type in your location, it's fun to see where we all are. Expecting to see a couple other folks here in chilly Wisconsin with me, and Michigan, Ontario, oh lovely, Colorado, Illinois, quite a few Wisconsin, that's excellent. Seattle, very cool. Seen some familiar names out there. All right, thank you for that. All right. Great. Well, as we go along, if you're just joining us, continue to put your name or put your location in the chat. We'd love to see where we're all dialing in from. But let's go ahead and get going, shall we? So welcome, everyone. Again, you are listening to a conversation with fermentation expert Sandor Katz and herbalist Linda Conroy. Now, tonight's event is brought to you by Midwest Women's Herbal. That's the organization behind the decade-strong Midwest Women's Herbal Conference. Give me a wave if you've been to one of those conferences. Yeah, hello, I see you. Also, the Mycelium Mysteries Retreat and many other live and virtual events. Now, we partner with diverse communities to produce enriching events like this, focused on well-being, herbalism, environmental awareness, and human connection, which I think we all need a little more of these days. I'm Bethany Creek. I'll be your hostess this evening. I host the virtual conferences that the Midwest Women's Herbal produces, and I'll also be helping out on site at the 2022 Midwest Women's Herbal Conference. Now that's going to be live at Camp Helen Brockman in Almond, Wisconsin over Memorial Day weekend this year. And we're really excited about that because it's in person and we do need that human connection. Just a few days left until early bird registration ends. So check out the website that I just posted in the chat and see if you can find what this year's theme is. I think you'll find it very intriguing. Now I'd like to introduce the founder of Midwest Women's Herbal, a bioregional herbalist, community organizer, educator, and elder in the wise woman tradition, Linda Conroy. Linda has been incorporating fermentation into her life for over 2 decades. She teaches hands-on classes, as well as programs and apprenticeships focused on herbs and fermentation for digestive health. And in 2017, Linda actually ventured down to rural Tennessee to participate in a week-long residency program with Sandor Katz. So we are thrilled to get them together tonight for this conversation. So I am thrilled to introduce my friend, Linda Conroy. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Bethany. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I see lots of familiar faces, and I'm just really delighted to be here. And I, as Bethany said, I went and spent some time with Sandor Katz a number of years ago at his week-long residency program on fermentation. And it was just such a delight to go there. I had been fermenting for a long time and wasn't sure, sometimes you're drawn to something and you're not sure why. And really what happened there, which was so delightful, was it filled in a lot of cracks in my knowledge about fermentation. It filled in cracks about, the whys and also some of the hows. And so I'm really delighted to be here this evening with Sandor. And if you're new to fermentation, I'm sure this conversation and his wisdom will give you some ideas. And if you're, an old hat at fermentation, I'm sure that some cracks will get filled in because he is just a wealth of knowledge. And he's the author of, 3 books. And I know there's lots of other small books and other pamphlets and things, Sandor, that I've seen all over the place that are consolidated. But I want to point out his books, because I know there's probably people here from all different walks of the fermentation journey, like I said, beginning to, having been on this path for a long time. But if you're brand new to fermentation, and even if you're not, you need to get his original book. And he has the newest copy. Thank you, Sandor. I have an older edition. But that book, it is such a delight, and I wanted to bring it up for a couple reasons. But before I ever actually met you, Sandor, that book was such a saving grace for a couple reasons. One, it encouraged me to play with fermentation. Like, try this and try that. Like, not a lot of cookbooks are able to do that. And I was so grateful, because it encouraged me to be curious and to do things and experiment. And so I'm so grateful for that book, and I hope that other people will go out and grab it if they don't already own it. And then Sandor's newest book, which I would encourage everyone to get, I've been reading it. It's called Fermentation Journeys, subtitle Recipes, Techniques, and Traditions from Around the World. Now we have the same edition. And I was so delighted to start reading this book, because it talks a lot about your journeys around the world and connecting with different cultures and different people and sharing about fermentation. And one of the things that I really loved about being at your place, Sandor, was the co-learning that went on. Like, I felt like, yes, you were facilitating, holding the container and sharing a lot, but you also were really curious and open to learning from everyone else. And it felt like the journeys came into your kitchen, because when I was there were people from all over the world who ventured to rural Tennessee to spend time there and be with you. And it was just such a delight. And when I saw that you had released this book, I thought of this event and thought, I wanted my friends and my community to get to spend a little bit of time with you. And then you said you were going to be sitting in your kitchen. So here we are, spending a little bit of time in your kitchen. And I remember when I was there, thinking to myself, I don't go into a lot of places where it's just like eating at home, and being in your kitchen was just like eating in my home, and more. So thank you for being here. It's such a delight, and thank you for spreading and instigating. Really, you're an instigator of fermentation around the world. So thank you and welcome.
Well, sweet. Well, thank you so much, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to show a couple of other books, if I'm okay. So I just want to point out, this is The Art of Fermentation. So this is my book that came out in 2012. This is the biggest one of the books. Lots of information. I've even had people tell me TMI, too much information. Just because it's fun, I just want to show you. I don't know if you've seen this, and the other people who are with us. This is the zine that I wrote in 2001. This is the original iteration of Wild Fermentation, and the subtitle is A Do-It-Yourself Guide to Cultural Manipulation. So, really, like, writing the book grew out of, me writing this little zine, because I was unable to attend this annual food Skillshare event, where from 1998 until 2000, I was sort of teaching my first workshops, teaching sauerkraut making workshops. And, it was the fact that I wasn't able to, I had a conflict in 2001 and I was unable to be there. So I spent a month writing down my fermentation recipes. And, I guess I would say that, like many young people who have the idea that they want to be writers, I never really knew what to write about. And it was like the process of writing this that made me realize, like, wow, there's a lot here. There's a lot for me to learn. I have a lot to say about this. So that's that. Now, and then I just want to show, this is my book that's mostly been forgotten. This is The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved, Inside America's Underground Food Movements. Came out in 2006. It's still in print. This is basically about grassroots movements to reclaim food in lots of different ways. And this book came out last year, just in the early part of the pandemic. It's called Fermentation as Metaphor. and it's more reflective and exploring like the idea of fermentation and different ways that we use this word in the English language to describe any phenomenon which is like bubbly and excited.
Mhm.
So that's just all I wanted to interject. And now ask me what you will.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing all of those. I have all but one of those, which is the last one, which I will acquire after we get off of this Zoom call, because I'm excited about the fermentation as a metaphor. It's a really a powerful thing to look at fermentation as a way, as a metaphor, as a way for transformation. And so, and you certainly have created a lot of transformation wherever you seem to go. So I was hoping we could start out with what before everybody came on, we were talking a little bit about fermentation location. About how fermenting in different places can really vary and be different depending on the microbes, depending on the temperature, depending on space, because we were talking about your temperatures in Tennessee versus ours, which are right now below 0 in Wisconsin. So I was thinking maybe we could carry on a little bit about that conversation and what you've seen when you've gone different places or when the weather changes where you are, etc.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is just, point out that, fermentation is a phenomenon that is, really a manifestation of place. And so first of all, start with what you're fermenting. People don't ferment, things that are, or historically, traditionally, people have not fermented foods that are rare and precious, or, things that they've had to bring in from long distances. People have fermented whatever is abundant where they live. If you live in a region where there's lots of apples, people ferment apple cider. If you live in a region where you can grow grapes, people, make wine out of the grapes. If you live in a region where people grow soybeans, you ferment soybeans. If you live in a place where people are growing wheat or growing rye, you ferment those things. So, just beginning with what you ferment, that itself is a manifestation of place. Then, the organisms that are on the food, in a certain way, they're fairly predictable, but everything we eat, just like our own bodies, are populated by these elaborate communities of microorganisms. And just like each of us is host to, what ultimately is a unique community of organisms, in our gut, on the surfaces and orifices of our bodies, so too, every carrot, every cabbage, is a reflection of, the soil that it grew in and the specificity of place. So, if I, harvested some, cabbage from my garden in the autumn, and Linda, you harvested some cabbage from, your garden in Wisconsin in the autumn, and, we made our sauerkraut and sent it off to a lab, they would be a little bit different because of, where they grew and the specific, soil conditions, which are a reflection in some way of the climate conditions. Now, certain ferments you can make in a wide variety of temperatures, sauerkraut. I would say, any temperature where a human being could comfortably exist, you could make sauerkraut. You could make sauerkraut at, 50 degrees, or honestly at even cooler temperatures. It would be very, very slow. And you could make sauerkraut, in a heat wave when it's, 95 degrees or 100 degrees. The sauerkraut you make at 95 or 100 degrees is not going to taste as good and not going to have as pleasing of a texture as the sauerkraut that you make in a cooler temperature, but it can be done.
And it's
You
going to
know,
happen a lot faster.
it'll happen a lot faster, but it'll have a softer texture. It won't have as much biodiversity, which means that it won't have as much like complexity of flavor.
Right.
Certain ferments need a really specific temperature range. So, for instance, yogurt. Most of the yogurt that we eat, the thick yogurt, the yogurt that is like almost a solid, where you can like turn over the jar and it'll stay in the jar. Those are thermophilic cultures, and thermophilic means that those cultures, really thrive and perform well in temperatures generally higher than our body temperature. So, when I make yogurt, I incubate it around 110 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. Makes sense.
So, certain things are very specific. Actually, right under my computer is sitting on on a crock that has some sake in it. And, sake generally is done at a cool temperature. And then, like in Japan, typically people don't make sake in the summertime. It's an activity for the, fall, winter, and spring. And usually, to get like, really good flavor in sake without a lot of sourness, you want to do that around 60 degrees. So it's a seasonally constrained activity. And I'm doing it in the winter when, my kitchen is generally staying, 60 to 65 degrees. And so that works out really well. Because we've become cheese is a great one to mention, because, specific styles of cheeses really evolved, as manifestations of very specific local conditions,
Very specific.
Camembert cheese, right? I mean, that has to do with a set of caves in Camembert, France. But because we've become so good at manipulating not only temperature but humidity, in your home in Wisconsin, with a little bit of tech savvy, you could simulate the temperature and humidity conditions of a cave in Camembert, France. And, you could go online to cheesemaking.com or any one of a number of different websites that sell different pure culture cheese starters. And you could buy the right organisms, and, you could make something that was, more or less like a Camembert cheese, but not because your location specifically lends itself to it, but because, humans have figured out ways to, transcend the limitations of climate. So, I mean, within my home, I have a cellar where that stays more or less the earth temperature, except in the summertime, where I ferment things that want a long, slow fermentation. I have an incubator where I make things like koji and tempeh that need 85 to 90 degree temperature. And I basically use an incandescent light bulb and a little temperature controller that turns it on and off to maintain in a basically defunct refrigerator, an insulated box, this kind of a temperature. My yogurt I make by heating up an insulated cooler with hot water, and then, using that to maintain the temperature. So, different things I do, in different places. And then, there's things I just do on the counter in my kitchen. Sometimes if I want it to be a few degrees warmer, I might put things on top of my refrigerator, because refrigerators generate a little bit of heat. Or, sometimes if I'm rising bread in the wintertime, I'll put it on the mantle above my fireplace and let it warm up. So I'll get a more dramatic rise from that. So, I work with, different kinds of microclimates within my house.
Right.
But there are certain things that can't be easily made, anywhere. Like me. Okay, here's a good one. It's miso. So yeah, there's different styles of miso. Anywhere you could make a short fermenting miso that ferments for a few weeks, but the longer fermenting misos that go through, a year or 2 or 3 years, if you have them inside of a heated space and they're getting dry heat for months every year, they're going to turn into a brick. So, generally I do those in the cellar that I'm not heating. I visited a community in Alaska once, in coastal Alaska, and they were making all this miso. And actually, they were fermenting it outside. And the miso is salty enough, and the temperatures in coastal Alaska are mild enough that it didn't freeze in the wintertime. They were able to, it slows way down when the temperatures are low, but they were able to work with the ambient temperatures.
Right. And it's just so interesting to get to know that. And then I know for myself, I changed regions, and that actually made such a difference. And I had to almost relearn some of my fermentation habits when I changed regions.
Well, I mean,
So,
especially things that like you're feeding in an ongoing way. So like, people who maintain kombucha, like in a cool space, like kombucha really likes it like, 72, 75 degrees. Once you're in a 60-degree kitchen, kombucha is not happy. I mean, it won't die, but it's not going to progress much. And so you might just have one batch that sort of slowly maintains itself over the course of, 4 months where the kitchen is cold, and then picks back up as the kitchen warms up. Things like kefir and water kefir, that sometimes people really get into a routine of, feeding it every day, every other day, every third day. Your timing can just shift with the seasons, or certainly if you move from one climate to another.
well, and that's one of the reasons I loved this Wild Fermentation book, the first official book that you published, because you basically let people know that it's a relationship, and that you have to be in connection and watching what's happening. And it's not like, you take a frozen TV dinner out of the freezer and you put it in the oven. You don't have to pay attention. You have to have a relationship with all of these things. And in your new book, that was
Uh-oh.
Oh, I think we might have lost our Linda for just a moment. So we will work on getting her back in. But, I do want to encourage the audience, if you have any burning questions for Sandor, now's a great opportunity to, to pose those questions. One question that I've kind of been thinking is, is there one thing that you fermented that really stands out in your mind as just one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Well, sure. A few years ago, a friend of mine showed a friend of mine who is Cherokee, and is very involved in preserving and spreading Cherokee traditions, showed up at my place with more ramps than I've ever seen. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with ramps. I'm sure ramps are up in Wisconsin as well.
Mhm.
And, I know a couple of places around here where, I'll harvest a handful of ramps and every year make myself like an omelet or something like that. But, my friend showed up with like 2 5-gallon buckets full of ramps. And it took me like 2 days to clean them. I chopped them up and salted them and made ramps kraut. And it was just one of the most delicious things I've ever tasted. It was just had such a beautiful flavor. And then I had after we ate that, I had the juice of it left, and I was like using the juice in salad dressings, and it was just like the saddest thing when I used the last of that juice. It was just like so sublimely delicious. So that's the first thing that pops into my mind as a really like special uniquely delicious ferment. But let me say that
great.
like a lot of ferments are very, very delicious. And I'll talk for a minute about something that I've been obsessed with lately and that I write about a lot in my new book. And so I'm sure that, okay, Linda's back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got kicked off for a second there.
Okay, well, so I'm gonna
when you're
Let me
talking
just
about
finish telling the
wraps,
story that I started telling. Okay, so I'm
yes,
sure some of
please.
you have heard of natto. So natto is this Japanese ferment of whole soybeans, and it's incredibly delicious. But very often, people who first try it as adults who weren't exposed to it as children find it challenging. It's one of the alkaline ferments, so it like an aged camembert cheese, it has like a little ammonia scent to it. But I think that the bigger obstacle for people is that it develops a slimy coating on the beans, and a lot of people are very put off by the sliminess of the beans. And the first time I tried it, I was too, but I love it now. Like, I can't get enough natto, and I make it frequently. But I've in my new book, I write quite a bit about some natto-like foods that are eaten in different places, including West Africa, including China, including India or parts of India. But everywhere else where they eat foods like this, they dry them, they dehydrate them. And so I've been doing a lot of dehydrating of natto and making little spice mixes. And this is what in my kitchen we've been calling a special sauce. It's not really a sauce, it's a powder. And it's dehydrated natto ground up with roasted sesame seeds and a little bit of salt. And, I've just been sharing this with my friends and neighbors, and I have yet to find anyone who doesn't like it. It just turns it into such a approachable, accessible flavor, and it's like really savory and really, really delicious. But natto and related foods are a big theme of my book, and this is something that I put it on almost everything. I put it on my my eggs in the morning, and I'll sprinkle some on my split pea soup and my oatmeal, and really, really delicious. So anyway, enough of that tangent.
Well, no, I'm curious about this. I have a couple questions about it for you.
Okay, great.
One of the things I've noticed is that when people grow up eating like slimy things, they enjoy them because it's what they grew up eating. And so transforming it the way you have will make it more palatable to the Western palate, so to speak. But I'm wondering, when you have encountered people who actually eat it in a form where it's slimy, that if they grew up with it, they enjoy that, I would imagine. Because I've seen that.
Well, I can just speak from my own experience that, as someone who didn't like it the first time I tried it, and then I was really convinced by a couple of people I met and talked to about it that I should give it another try. And a lot of fermented foods, I would say, fall into the category of what we might call acquired tastes. And all the time I'll meet parents who just like assume that children don't like sauerkraut. And I can just tell you that's not true.
That's not my experience.
Maybe if you don't introduce a kid to sauerkraut until they're 11 years old, then they might say, "Ooh, that's gross." But if you were like giving them tastes of sauerkraut when they were 2 or 3 years old, chances are they're going to be perfectly happy with it, and they're going to like it for their whole lives. And I think that. For me, a big part of acquiring the taste for something that I don't initially love is watching people take great pleasure in it. So I would say, like, all the cheeses that get me excited at this point in my life are cheeses that as a kid I would have thought were incredibly disgusting. But my parents liked to eat cheese, and so I saw it, and like I was repelled by the cheeses, but I saw how much they liked them, and somehow that made me willing to give them another try until I started liking them. And I think with slimy foods, there's nothing people like all kinds of weird textures, right? Look how popular, like, gummy candies are. But I've come to really love slimy foods. I'm the guy who will just like chew, eat a raw pot of okra and love it.
I'm with you. I love okra. I want to ask you one more question about your condiments because I really
Okay. Yeah.
I'm curious and I'd actually like to make it, but what temperature are you dehydrating it on?
Like, 95 to 100, I mean, I think as long as you keep it under like maybe 115 or so, it'll be fine. I mean, actually, in making natto, you can let it get, it can take temperatures up to that. I mean, typically when you make natto, you do it like at around 104 degrees. I've seen it go up to 110, 115 and be fine. And actually the bacteria that produces natto is very interesting, Bacillus subtilis, in that when it's stressed by heat, it forms these spores that can survive boiling temperatures. So, you don't really even need a starter for natto. If you cook if you just boil rather than pressure cooking soybeans until they're soft, and then just like leave them, drain them, leave them in an environment where they won't dry out, where they'll maintain some of their moisture and yet be able to breathe. Something like, maybe a piece of saran wrap over your pan that it's in with a couple of holes in it. It will just develop. It's on all beans and it survives boiling temperatures. So, so that's interesting to me.
Nice. Yeah, and for me as an herbalist, it's interesting to me. I love condiments because it's easy to get people to ingest them and they can take them with them if they're traveling, so if you're really, trying to improve someone's health and their digestive health, that is the kind of thing, especially maybe people who are just warming up to fermentation. So I really love that idea.
A friend of mine just gave me this. It's a nettle furikake. So it's like this is a Japanese condiment with sesame seeds, and typically it would be nori, but my friend made some with dehydrated nettles,
Nice.
and it's a wonderful condiment I've been sprinkling on foods.
Yeah, I know. I call that gamashio, and we put other seaweeds in it too. And it's so those two combined, your condiment and that one together, would be a nutritive powerhouse from my perspective.
Yeah.
So I was thinking earlier on when you were mentioning collecting what's in your environment, the abundance. And I remember being at your residency program and we went to a farm and we collected cabbage and daikon radishes that were very abundant on the farm that we visited, and we brought them back and for hours we cut up cabbage and grated, and we put them in that you have a great big fermentation vat that we put those in. And I was curious in that was, your local abundance. How big is that fermentation vat that we were filling with sauerkraut? It was big enough that you were putting whole heads in the middle to ferment the whole heads. And
Yeah.
A little bit about that.
So, I mean, basically, so I've done it in different things. I mean, I actually for some years I was using a 55-gallon wooden barrel that I bought from the Jack Daniel's distillery that it had, whiskey aging in it, and that worked fine. The problem with that is that over the course of a couple of years, the acidity of the sauerkraut corroded the rings that hold the barrel together. So one year I packed, 55 gallons, that takes like, something like 400 plus pounds of vegetables. And then one year I packed it all in, and then I went to check on it, and one of the rings had busted and all the liquid had drained out. And I lost a huge amount of kraut that year. So at some point I did what I had seen there's a business in Berkeley, California called the Cultured Pickle Shop, and I've become friendly with Alex and Kevin, the couple who own it and run it, and they were using these stainless steel, they're called variable capacity fermentation tanks, and they're really made for the wine industry. But they were using those to make kraut. And, you know, generally I've advised people to stay away from fermenting vegetables in metallic vessels because, you know, the acids and the salt both are corrosive. And even, you know, household quality stainless steel just has a thin coating that's stainless, and anywhere where it scratches, it can start to corrode. But these, you know, these vessels are made from a, you know, a higher industrial quality of stainless steel, and they stand up really, really well. And the variable capacity means that it's got a cylindrical shape, and then it has a lid that drops into it that has more or less like a bicycle inner tube around the outside of it and a pump. So when it's full, that's right inside the rim sitting near the top. You know, right now my vessel is like, you know, about a third empty because I've been harvesting it and, you know, giving it away to neighbors and friends. And so then the lid drops down. And so each time it eliminates the airspace. And, you know, and I mean, in any kind of food preservation, and, you know, the jam sitting in your refrigerator, you know, oxidation is really what causes most food spoilage. And, you know, any of you who've been fermenting vegetables, you know, all the problems with fermenting vegetable, well, not all the problems, but most of the problems happen on the surface because, you know, what's submerged is protected from the flow of oxygen, but what's at the surface, you know, comes into contact with air with oxygen. And that's where you can get calm yeast or hairy white molds or, you know, different things that, you know, aren't big problems, but over time they can, you know, they can degrade it and they can cause you to have to sort of like, you know, wipe away, you know, remove some of the surface and discard it. But, you know, the thing I love about this variable capacity tank is like, I never lose any. You know, each time I put the top back on, the airspace is eliminated, and then I pump it up so that, you know, there's no flow of oxygen and there's just a little one-way valve so that the carbon dioxide pressure can release.
Nice.
And this year I have mostly daikon radishes in there, a few cabbages. Those are the, you know, the greener specks. But yeah, and actually, I mean, in my fridge, I have like a daikon the size of my arm. You know, I bury the big ones inside of it, you know, just like then. And, you know, when you do a large quantity like that, you can do that. And there's also traditions that I write about in Fermentation Journeys of fermenting whole heads of cabbage. So like in Southeastern Europe, you know, the former Yugoslavian lands, I encountered this in Croatia, but, you know, they typically ferment the heads of cabbage whole, or I should say almost whole, because a key part of it is you have to cut out the core. And that's what enables the brine to really get to the center of the cabbage. So you just take out the core of each cabbage. The way I learned to do it is you fill that with salt and then you pack them in. So like, you know, I mean, I did it last winter just in a 5-gallon bucket. And I was able to fit like 4 or 5 whole heads. And then I took a couple of heads and quartered them to fill some of the spaces in between them. You know, and then I covered the whole thing with brine and let them ferment for months. And then the beautiful thing about fermenting a whole cabbage is you can peel off leaves and stuff them. So like the sarma that I learned to make, it was stuffed cabbage that I learned to make in Croatia. Instead of cooking the cabbage first, you just ferment it, and then it has this beautiful sour flavor. And then the leaves are pliable, and then you know, wrap your, you know, rice and vegetables and meat, if you're using it, whatever you're going to stuff it with, you wrap it in that, and then you cook those.
Oh, I love that, because we ferment grape leaves all the time and stuff them, but doing it with the cabbage leaves, sure, I love that. That's great. I wanted to back up just for a second because this is something I often tell people, and it's related to what you were saying about the airspace. And I'm a cheesemaker, and I teach a lot of home cheese making classes. And I tell people, when you bring milk home if you have it like in a gallon jar and you're not going to drink it right away, put it in smaller jars and never leave any headspace. And so my fun story about that is that I bought a gallon of raw milk one time, and I was traveling and I couldn't take it with me, and it was in the fridge, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm just going to leave it there. And I came home 3 weeks later. It had never been open. It was full. There was no headspace, and it tasted just like the day I put it in the refrigerator. And
Wow.
so, milk, we think of milk spoiling really quickly, but really, I think it's a lot to do with that, that headspace and how things get contaminated, like you're saying, with other yeasts or bacteria that are, not really wanted in that space. So.
Yeah, and I mean, same thing with yogurt. I'll usually make, every month or so, I'll make like a gallon of yogurt. But instead of making a gallon of yogurt in one big jar or 2 big jars, I make it in pint jars. So I'll make like 8 pint jars of yogurt, and each one is full. And so if they end up sitting around for a couple of months, it's fine. If you have a big one and you eat it slowly, it ends up developing a really yeasty flavor, because that oxygen rich environment that develops over time in a mostly empty jar changes the nature of the yogurt. And I always start my yogurt with a fresh jar that hasn't had any air exposure.
I have some of your yogurt culture from when I was at your place, and also sourdough. So this is something I was hoping you might talk about, because I found it really wonderful to learn about this when I was at your place, is sourdough soup. Because people are always wanting to know what to do with their extra sourdough starters. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sourdough soup.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, sourdough has so many applications. So, I mean, I don't know that I've made sourdough soup since then, but you can use sourdough to thicken a soup, to flavor a soup. There's a wonderful Russian beverage called kvass that's basically old dry bread re-fermented using sourdough as the starter, and it ends up being this like sour effervescent drink. And my mother's parents were immigrants from Belarus. They were the grandparents I knew well growing up. My father's great grandparents came from Lithuania. I never, when any of them were alive, had kvass, but when I got interested in fermentation and I went and sought out kvass in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, and it was like I can't believe I've been missing this all of my life. It was like finding an old friend or something. And I really feel like I have a genetic predisposition to flavors like this. And so kvass is a wonderful beverage you can drink. And then in my kitchen, I don't know if you remember this, if we were doing this during that residency program, but I do these like savory sourdough pancakes that are like an ongoing recycling project in my kitchen. So, if I have some leftover oatmeal, if I have some leftover rice, goes right into the sourdough pancake. When I refresh my sourdough and my sourdough discard, I put that into the sourdough pancakes. I also put vegetables in, I put cheese in, really virtually anything. So, I mean, sourdough is very versatile and it's wonderful for making bread, but it has a lot of other applications as well.
Well, I love that, because so many times people are telling me they're throwing it away, and I'm like, no, throw it away. And of course, you can always put it in your compost or give it to your chickens. I do that too, but all those different creative ways that you can utilize it. I love that. So Bethany was just letting me know that we have some troubleshooting questions from people out in the community here. So I'm wondering if we want to take a couple of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got one question from Cara. and I'll put it in the chat and then I'll just let you know. So she's curious about troubleshooting in general. So what do you do when, when something goes bad? Like if, pickles get soggy before they ferment, or if something rots first. She has knowledge about how to, start off with, a clean slate and everything, but how do you troubleshoot if you see things going south?
Well, okay. So you're saying if something rots, if something just smells terrible to you, not every, especially if you're experimenting, not every experiment is going to be successful. I'm not saying you should just like casually throw away food, but like, don't force yourself to eat something that like tastes awful to you. Like if you feel like something just like is completely unappealing, you can feed it to your compost. Now, if your vegetables are soft, a great salvage protocol that I keep running into for vegetables that get too soft during the fermentation. And let me say that that's because of enzymes. There are what makes vegetables crispy and crunchy are pectins, and there are enzymes in all vegetables that are pectinase enzymes that break down the pectins. And it seems that in watery summer vegetables like cucumbers and like zucchini, the pectinase enzymes are much more concentrated, and they're much more prone to get soft. And also they're ready in the hottest weather when those enzymes are going to be most active in any case. But a salvage protocol that I've come across when people's vegetables get soft is dehydrating them. So if you dehydrate them, remove the water from them, they become crispy again. And it's a different kind of a crispiness than a, sort of fresh, juicy vegetable crispiness. But I've had some beautiful like dehydrated kimchi and dehydrated sauerkraut. I've also had wonderful crackers, like raw crackers made with flax seeds and other seeds that are soaked sometimes with brine from ferments, then spread out and dehydrated. But you can mix vegetables in with that. So if you finally chop the vegetables and mix them with the seed mixture and spread them out, you can make beautiful dehydrated crackers and such with them. So, for that specific problem, that would be my suggestion. But in general, like, one aspect of this is like, you have to trust your senses, and I periodically throw away batches that just like sat too long. They just smell off. They're not, they're just no longer appealing to me. And I think, you have to trust your senses.
It's okay for me to bring Cara on to clarify her question.
Can I just add something to that before you do that? Is that with soft pickles, one of the things I've done is to make relish. So instead of leaving it as a pickle, I'll turn it into a relish, and that seems to work really well. And then with pickles, and I know I'm sure you talk about this in your book, but when you make them in the first place to be proactive around this, you can add tannic leaves like grape leaves or blackberry leaves or oak leaves work. We have lots of oaks here and they're quite tannic. So there are things you can do to also, prevent that. And also I've found with pickles, if you're making those, because they're the ones I've had the most challenge with getting soft, is to pickle them very quickly after they're harvested, not let them sit around for a long time. So those are just some things that I do that I think of too.
Great. So Cara, if you want to come online and clarify for us. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and thanks for both of you. I'm so geeked out right now. I'm just going to say that. So my question, I guess, is more about like if you repeatedly are having the same trouble. Like I can tell when something's gone bad. I've done enough fermenting that I know when it's like, oh, this probably shouldn't go in my belly. Although the drying out, like if I can catch it early, that's a great idea. I'm just curious, like if you wanted to like if you continually try to ferment something and it's not working for you, how do you troubleshoot that?
Okay, can you give me an example and tell me like what you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, like I can think of two examples. So one is the pickles. I just have so much trouble with them, and I've done all of the things. Right straight from my garden into the vat, with my grape leaves. Another was like kvass. I tried, like I was using your book and I like tried a couple of different things, different temperatures. And I just like some things I just can't quite get. And it's almost like the critters aren't right. So I'm just wondering like how if you ever encounter that kind of situation, like what you do to like play around with it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one thing I want to say is that the internet is an incredible resource. And, just like, I mean, the limitation of it is, it's hard to know like whose advice to follow. But if you're just like looking for ideas, my pickle, my fermented pickles came out soft. Like, what can I do to avoid this? You'll get a lot of suggestions. I'm going to throw out a couple more to augment the ones that Linda already offered, which is scraping away any residue of the blossom end on each cucumber, because the blossom is really where you get the highest concentration of those. And if you scrape away any residue of the blossom, you're going to get rid of a lot of the enzymes. The other thing is the coolest temperature you can manifest. You'll never get mushy pickles if you ferment them at 60 to 65 degrees. It's because cucumbers are ripe in the summer when our ambient temperatures tend to be higher than that. I've actually been very consistent in recent years, like, here in my environment where, daily temperatures will typically be higher than 85 and, average temperatures are well into the 70s. And what I do is I ferment them literally for like 4 days. And then I put them in the refrigerator and leave them for like 2 more weeks in the refrigerator. And they'll slowly keep on getting more sour in the refrigerator, but those enzymes, can't do anything at refrigerator temperatures. I think because a lot of the places where these kinds of cucumbers come from, a lot of the directions say, ferment for 2 weeks or something like that. But if you're in a place with high temperatures, like, I would not ferment them for 2 weeks at ambient temperature. I would do it for I look for the color to change. Like as the pH changes, the color changes from the bright green of a fresh cucumber to more of an olive green color. And as soon as I see the color turn to that duller olive green color, maybe I'll give it 1 more day at ambient temperatures and then get it in the refrigerator to slow it down. But I mean, I think, you just have to use the analytical skills that you have, try to crowdsource and get more advice via the internet. Look in books that might have information, and that's all you can do. And try again. Try not to be discouraged.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that.
Mhm.
The other question we had was about water kefir. Lynn was wondering if you could elaborate on that and give us just a little bit of information on how to make that.
Sure. So water kefir is it's an example of a SCOBY. A SCOBY is a symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. SCOBY. The famous SCOBY right now is kombucha. The kombucha SCOBY looks like a rubbery pancake that floats on top of your sweet tea mixture, which is what you're fermenting with it. And embedded in that SCOBY is this community of organisms that grow into the tea, consume carbohydrates, transform them into acids and a little bit of alcohol. Another famous SCOBY would be kefir. Kefir is a milk culture from Central Asia, the Caucasus Mountains, and kefir has a completely different appearance. Kefir looks like little florets of cauliflower. It has this sort of like undulating form. It's really interesting. It's a very complex community. More than 30 distinct organisms have been identified within it. and you just put it in milk, agitate it a little bit, and all those organisms grow into the milk and, digest nutrients from the milk and, turn it into this, delicious, effervescent, somewhat sour. The longer you leave it, the more sour it becomes, beverage. Water kefir is sort of an internet age name for a Mexican culture that in Mexico is known as tibicos, and they're these little crystals that you put in any kind of carbohydrate-rich liquid. You can put it in, fruit juice, in herbal infusion with sugar or honey in it, and then it'll consume carbohydrates and turn it into acids and a little bit of alcohol, and it can make it effervescent. You can make, wonderful, naturally fermented sodas using it. The downside of tibicos, water kefir, is it's like having a pet, because you got to keep feeding it. It can be a wonderful pet, but if you're not prepared to just like keep on feeding it, it's not going to thrive. So, I mean, I don't even try to keep a tibicos going in my kitchen anymore. I don't want to drink that much sweet stuff that I have to be like making it all the time. So I don't. My friends who have a local fermentation business, it's one of the products they make. So once in a while, and they propagate very, very quickly. So, when I want to play with water kefir, I go visit my friends and, get some of their water kefir grains and play with them for a couple of weeks. But, I just don't have, I have, my lifestyle is too scattered to really be able to keep them going. And, it's just not my, it's not my top priority in terms of like what I want to be eating and making in my kitchen. But I've had some really, really delicious and beautiful water kefir sodas for sure.
And it does work really well with herbs. I mean, it's amazing. I've made nettle soda and rosehip soda, but like you, Sandor, it's hard to keep it going. As, I go through phases where I make it a lot, and then other times I, kind of fade away and don't make it as often. I'm curious in that when I'm hearing you talk, I've never done this, but it occurs to me that you might be able to freeze the culture if you weren't utilizing it as often.
Well, and people dehydrate them. People dehydrate them also.
Okay, sure.
But I've had mixed results with bringing back to life dehydrated ones. With freezing, so the issue with freezing, fermentation cultures, it's the expansiveness of water. Like, when you freeze water, it expands, and in your ice cube tray, it sort of, can expand out of the ice cube tray a little bit. If you put a full jar of water in your freezer, your jar will break. The same thing can happen with cell membranes. So basically drying these things as much as you can will enhance the success, before you freeze them, will enhance the success. You'll minimize, cells bursting if you can, like at least dry off surface moisture, or, briefly dehydrate them in the sun or in a low temperature dehydrator before you freeze them.
Well, and then why freeze them? So, yes. Bethany, did you have another question? It looked like you were.
There was a question about recommendations for purchasing a small oak barrel to ferment cucumbers in. And I noticed that there was a really cool equipment section on your website, Sandor. But anything you want to tell us about equipment and kind of going down that road?
Well, I mean, honestly, mostly at small scales. I ferment in jars. 2 days ago, I did a sauerkraut making workshop, and this isn't just a quart jar. I do a lot of things in jars. I do things in crocks here. This is a nice small crock. This is maybe a gallon or gallon and a half size crock. I have different size crocks, up to, I have like a 12-gallon crock. I wouldn't recommend a 12-gallon ceramic crock because most people can't pick it up. And when it's empty, never mind when it's full. And so, if you're going to use a big ceramic crock, you've got to like put it in the place where you intend to keep your ferment before you fill it up. I've never done cucumbers in a barrel. Usually I've done them in a crock or a jar, depending on the scale that I'm doing it at. But I mean, I know that, like, for instance, in Russia, like small countertop wooden barrels are easily available. I don't see them in North America. I mean, maybe on the internet you could find something like that, but they're not something that's commonly available here. So I would say like glass. I mean, I love gallon-sized glass jars. That like, down here in the South, Mount Olive pickles come in these gallon-sized jars. So, periodically I'll find people like at a yard sale or something, someone's selling a bunch of these gallon-sized jars. So I use them for food storage and sometimes for fermenting. But crocks, I mean, ceramic crocks are, the most. Well, I mean, really, I learned to ferment in ceramic crocks, and as I got more involved in, teaching people how to do smaller scale ferments, I realized how handy jars are, and I ferment a lot of things in jars now.
I know I utilize a lot of old crock pot crocks I'll find in thrift shops for fermentation. And then another thing is bars and restaurants sometimes have glass gallon jars because like cherries still come in those and things. So I've asked restaurants sometimes to save those for me. So there's some ideas I have for that. So
and also, I mean, plastic, also hard plastic. I mean, chances are if you're buying any fermented products that, they were fermented in plastic barrels. So like, the 200-liter stainless steel vessel that I told you that I have, that's like a $500 item. You could get something with the same capacity for $20 made out of hard plastic. And so, commercial manufacturers, if they're gonna invest in equipment like that, they're gonna pass it on in the price of their product. So most of them just opt to have to work with the cheaper materials. Now, I mean, I certainly can't tell you that, nothing is ever going to leach from the plastic into your ferment. But, if you're just looking for, practical, affordable solutions, 5-gallon plastic buckets, really work perfectly well as fermentation vessels.
right, I've certainly utilized them for sure. So, Bethany, any other questions in the chat?
I think that is it for questions in the chat. I did personally have a question, just because I know a lot of people here are, fermentation, I don't want to say pros, but it sounds like they know what they're doing. But for newbies like me, what's like one thing that's like really easy to start with without, a lot of fancy equipment or anything, just something simple and easy to kind of get my feet wet?
Sauerkraut. I mean, sauerkraut was my gateway into fermentation. I learned how to make sauerkraut from the joy of cooking. The first year I was gardening, I was such a naive city kid. It hadn't occurred to me that all the cabbage would be ready at about the same time. So the first year that I was gardening and I faced this, pretty obvious reality of agricultural production, I looked in the joy of cooking and learned how to make sauerkraut. In terms of, a lot of people, because we've all grown up hearing about how dangerous bacteria are, it's very easy for people to project all the anxiety they've ever, had about bacteria onto the idea of fermenting anything. And so, at the first workshop I ever taught in 1998, one of the students looked at the jar that she had just prepared, and she said, how do I know that there are good bacteria growing in this jar and not some dangerous bacteria that might make me sick or even kill somebody? So, what I can tell you about sauerkraut, and the reason why I think it's such a great first project, there's no danger. Like according to the US Department of Agriculture, the number of cases of food poisoning or illness that have been documented from fermented vegetables in the United States ever is 0. And they can't even find any cases in, any other country that we share data with. So, I mean, when you take a vegetable and you ferment it, it becomes safer than it was raw. We hear every year about people getting sick from, raw vegetables that had been exposed to some sort of incidental contamination, but that does not happen with sauerkraut. I mean, because it's so self-protecting, because every single time lactic acid bacteria dominate, and as they acidify the environment, if there happened to be some random cells of Salmonella, E. coli, other organisms that we associate with food poisoning, they would not survive the acidity. It's just very convenient fact for us that acidity makes food safer. So to make sauerkraut, all you do is you take some vegetables. I mean, could be cabbage, but it also could be turnips or carrots or celeriac or any one of any. You can really experiment with virtually any vegetables. You create surface area, chop it, grate it, shred it. Create surface area. The tools you need are a knife and a cutting board. And then, you shred it and then you salt it. There's no magic number of how much salt. Like different recipes might recommend different amounts of salt, but really what I would say is salt it to taste. Lightly salt as you shred the vegetables, then mix them all together and taste it and add more salt if you like. Add other seasonings if you like or don't. Mix different vegetables together if you like or don't. Once they're salted to your liking and seasoned to your liking, spend a few minutes just squeezing them. At a larger scale, you might pound them with some kind of a blunt tool. What this does is it breaks down cell walls, releases juice. What the condition we're trying to create is to get the vegetables submerged under their own juices. So once they're nice and juicy, my test is I'll just pick up a little handful and squeeze it. And I want it to be like a wet sponge where juice just drains off of the vegetables. Then I just pack it into the vessel, whether I'm talking about a 200-liter vessel where we're going to be shredding vegetables for half the day to fill it up, or whether I'm talking about, a quart jar that'll take 2 pounds of vegetables and, depending on your knife skills, might take you 5 minutes or 15 minutes. Just stuff it in the jar until the vegetables are submerged, and then either use a weight or my favorite fix is just take an outer leaf.
Oh, he might be frozen, but
I
this.
know, I was wondering if he's frozen for everybody or just for me, but I can add a little bit until he comes back. He's talking about putting a weight or something over to hold the vegetable underneath the liquid is what he's talking about. And with what he's using as a leaf to do that, you can also buy glass weights. I've actually utilized rocks that I've sterilized. I'll boil them, sterilize them, and utilize them on top. So anything that'll keep the vegetable below the liquid is what I think he was trying to emphasize.
Okay.
Oh, well,
Great.
hopefully he will come on back. I wanted to mention, I was thinking as Sandor was talking about, I like to have people who are just starting out actually make carrot kraut, because carrots ferment a little more quickly, and so they're less likely to start to get off flavors. And first time people seem to have a lot of success, at least if you add some carrots to your kraut, because the carbohydrates in the carrots are higher than in cabbage, and so it'll ferment a little bit more quickly. So those are some tips about sauerkraut making. And then another thing that I like to mention to people is to keep when you're cutting your cabbage, to keep the size of the cabbage consistent, because if you have really thick pieces and really thin pieces, they're going to ferment at different rates. So that's just the kind of things to think about when you're morning.
I don't know where I went. I disappeared, but I'm back.
Oh, yay. We're glad you're back. I tried to finish your sentence about immersing.
I'm sure you did fine. You know, the thing is, none of
Perfect.
this is rocket science. Like, it's
Mhm.
just about like just trying to understand what's the condition you're trying to create. With sauerkraut, that condition is you're trying to get the vegetables submerged. And so you got to get them juicy. If you're working with with an old cabbage that sat in a refrigerated warehouse for 6 months, it might be dry. You might have to add a little bit of water to it. You know, you just have to have a clear understanding of like what you're trying to create and then try to do it. And you know, I've had wonderful sauerkraut that was 3 days old. I've had wonderful sauerkraut that was 3 weeks old. I've had wonderful sauerkraut that was 3 months old. I've had wonderful sauerkraut that was 3 years old. And you know, you can just do this at any, you know, for any length of time. You know, if you're in a very warm place, then you probably want to make it a little bit shorter. You know, you could only do 3 years if you really had like a root cellar where it could progress very, very slowly. But the process is extremely flexible.
That's perfect. I cannot wait to try this. Like, I keep thinking of all the different veggies I can go and ferment now. So thank you. That was perfect. I think a couple other folks were wondering where a good place to start was also. So thanks.
And I know there are a lot of herbal people in our community. Don't forget to add herbs, adding to your kraut, burdock, juniper berries, all of these things, dandelion leaves. You know, you're looking, a lot of people, I teach a lot of classes on herbs and fermentation for digestive health. And so you can put your dandelion in with your kraut, and there you have your bitters to help with digestion and the beneficial bacteria. There's so many health benefits. And I know, you know, Sandor, you're aware of that. And I think that might even be one of the reasons you started on this journey, was to promote your own health. And I know that's part of my journey. And so I wanted to, before we don't have to end right this second, but I wanted to ask you my new favorite question and see what your response might be. I've been asking people over and over again the question, what if nourishment works? Like, what if nourishment works to support our bodies and to help, you know, nourish us? Like, what if it works?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even ask that question. I mean, of course it works.
Of course it works.
I mean, of course it works. I mean, you know, that's not to say that, you know, there's anything you can eat that's going to make you live forever, or that, you know, is going to prevent you from ever having problems with your health. But I mean, the way I know it works is that I travel a lot. And sometimes I find myself in situations where, like, I don't eat enough vegetables, and I don't eat enough fiber, and I don't have, you know, fresh fermented things. And, you know, I see how quickly my, my bodily processes, you know, kind of degrade when I'm not nourishing myself well. So I would say, of course, nourishment works, and doesn't mean it's going to solve all of our problems. Or, one of my pet peeves is when people, you know, I've seen people write like, oh, fermentation reverses the aging process. You know, nothing reverses the aging process. You know, I mean, you know, there's things that you could do that maybe will enable you to, you know, sort of age in a way that you know, maintain, you know, greater functionality and, you know, feel graceful about it. But you know, nothing, you know, there's no fermented food that is going to reverse the clock.
No, it's really going to help you age with grace, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
That would be my vision anyway.
I did see a really good question. Someone asked about adding already fermented stuff to new batches of ferments. And, you know, in general with sauerkraut, you know, I like to start each batch fresh because it's a successional process, and it actually develops much more flavor complexity if it begins at the beginning and goes through its process. But more and more in my travels, I've been encountering styles of fermentation that make like a perpetual brine and work with that. And one of the things that I have in Fermentation Journeys is this Chinese style of fermenting vegetables. This is what I call Pao Cai, P-A-O-C-A-I, Pao Cai. And it's a brine that, you know, this brine's been going for like 2 years. And I mean, I fortify it. I have to add more salt because every batch of vegetables that I add to it, absorb some of the salt and remove salt. But, this is spiced with star anise and chili peppers and ginger and black cardamom and licorice, just like grated licorice, Sichuan peppercorns, and there's salt. And I started with a little bit of sugar, and I just keep putting vegetables in, taking vegetables out. I add salt sometimes. I've added more seasonings over time, but I've just been working with this perpetual brine. The woman in China who I met who showed me how to do this, had been working with the same pot for years. And just adding to it. Another thing that I have in my book is this is a turmeric mash. So I mean, I discovered a couple of years ago that I can grow turmeric where I live, and so I've been growing turmeric. And this is turmeric, garlic, and turnips, and a little bit of water and salt turned into a paste. And then I fermented that for about a month. And then since then, for like 2 years now, I've been burying vegetables in it, leaving them in for a week or so, taking them out, slicing them up and eating them, putting new vegetables in, letting them ferment, pulling them out. Over time, I have to add salt. Over time, I have to remove a little bit of liquid. But, it's an amazing pickling medium.
I'm always
that I'm using
carrots in there. It sounds like it would be so good with carrots.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my favorite is to put like daikons or other white vegetables in because they just absorb the brilliant color of the turmeric.
Sure.
But carrots are beautiful in it as well.
That's nice. So that recipe is in this book, right?
Yep.
Yes. Nice. And the recipe of what was the ferment you showed us before the paste?
Outside.
Yes. So that's also in that book, correct?
Yeah. And the thing is that I've met a few Chinese families who showed me their pao tsai, and everyone's pao tsai is a little bit different. Like fermentation is the furthest thing from standardized. And so, if there's particular flavors or, with medicinal herbs, I would say you want things that have a pleasing flavor, rather than rather than everything that that you like to ingest. Pick things with a pleasing flavor, but you can mix lots of different kinds of herbs into something like that, and really make it your own. And as Linda said at the beginning, I mean, fermentation, the reason to ferment yourself is to play with it, is to make flavors that will be appealing to you. So don't take any of my recipes or anybody's recipes as like the end. They're like a guideline to begin your experimentation, and then try incorporating things that are abundant, things that are in your garden or that are in your friend's garden, herbs that you like to use. Just make it your own by incorporating the things you like.
Wonderful. So we could probably talk all evening. So delightful. I want to, Sandor, give people a chance to know how to contact you. So you have a website, correct?
That's right. My website is wildfermentation.com. And, you could email me through there. You could find information about my books there. You can find information about my workshops. And Linda's already mentioned my residency program, but I also, I've been on a little bit of a teaching hiatus, thanks to COVID, but, I do teach other places, and I've taught, quite a few times in Wisconsin and places near there. But anyway, they're all on my website, so you can see where I'm teaching or what other online things I'm doing. And then also have all these links to just like, different fermentation resources on the internet. And, there's a lot of information out there.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope everybody pops on there and connects with you. And I would highly recommend when you redo the residency that people who feel inspired have that experience, because it really was wonderful to spend that time with you. And so thank you everyone for being here. This was hosted by the Midwest Women's Herbal. We put on lots of different events. And we will be having our herbal conference in the spring. And tomorrow is the deadline for an early registration deadline rate if you want to get that rate. We do have other people coming to that event who will be talking about fermentation, and we'll also have some hands-on workshops there. So check out MidwestWomen'sHerbal.com. And also you can check out my website, moonwiseherbs.com, because I will teach classes on fermentation and a lot of cheese making classes. I'm a big cheese maker. So Sandor, thank you so much. It's just such a pleasure to talk with you. I'm seeing so many thank yous in the chat. And I know I learned some things and got inspired to experiment. And yeah, so just thank you so much for being here and for being so generous. I just love how generous you are and how you share resources and share information far and wide. So just thank you so much.
Well, sweet. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure just getting to spend an hour hanging out with you again. And, thank you for inviting me and organizing this. And, thank you all for, taking your evening and spending some of it with us. And I hope, I hope this conversation has inspired some people to, try their hand at fermenting for the first time, or expand your repertoire and try something new. So thank you very much.
Great. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you.